Interview with Charles Olson, May 9th, 1974, his office. What it was like growing up as a boy in Sunnyvale. Things to do, school, whatever, people you remember.
This is going back now to the early days of the city of Sunnyvale, around the turn of the century. And my family came down from San Francisco in the spring of 1899. We were brought down here. At the time there was a land boom going on in Sunnyvale, conducted by the late W.E. Crossman Realty Company. We were brought down here on a special train on a Sunday. Everything was free, of course, with a giant barbecue under the oaks of the Sunnyvale Historic Society grounds. That's where we had the bar. And everybody was, who wanted to, could then sign up to buy land or grounds or lots. There was the first 2 blocks in Sunnyvale on the main street of Murphy Avenue, from Evelyn to Washington, was laid out in 50-foot lots. My father bought 5 acres just outside of Sunnyvale on Murphy Avenue and McKinley Avenue. It was at that time a hayfield. In the following weeks, we came down to see about our new property and hired a local builder, just a everyday carpenter, you know, not a contractor, but a builder, to build us a 3-room house for $600. And that didn't mean any inside plumbing or anything like that, but it was a 3-room house, and there was no electricity at that time, no gas. But anyway, we got the house completed and moved down. And that was our beginning in Sunnyvale.
Why did your father move to Sunnyvale?
The main object in him moving to Sunnyvale, or we moving to Sunnyvale, was his health. He had been told by his doctor in South San Francisco that he should get out of that damp climate. And he bathed some of the fog. And of course, Sunnyvale, with such a name as Sunnyvale, which had just been changed over from Enchinel, sounded pretty good to be in a place where there's lots of sun.
What was Enchinel?
Enchinel was Sunnyvale.
Where did the name come from?
Enchinel? Mm-hmm. Well, that was really the second name of Sunnyvale, I think. There was another name before that. It was called Murphy Station. And the railroad had been built, possibly 15 or 18 years prior to that. But Murphy Station was only a flag station, and then when they got to be Enchinel, we had certain trains that stopped every day. And as time went on, somebody suggested, and the man that suggested it was Mr. Crossman, the real estate promoter, who was an old-time promoter with a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and smoked a big cigar, and he made a motion to somebody, I don't know who, to change the name to Sunnyvale. And from there on out, it's been Sunnyvale ever since. And it was a very wise selection because it was a kind of a unique name. There was no other Sunnyvale in California, at least. After living in Sunnyvale, we lived right across from the grammar school at that time, which was on the corner of McKinley and Francis, and Matilda and Tape Street. As time went along, we lived in our house, and my father planted his first cherry orchard in the spring of 1900.
Did he know anything about agriculture before he came to Sunnyvale?
No, not very much.
Then why did he choose cherry orchard for a business?
Well, it seemed to him that cherries would be a good fruit to raise, and his first orchard was only 5 acres of which he planted the cherries.
Did he have a competition from other cherry farmers?
Well, at that time there were not very many cherry growers in the immediate vicinity. In fact, the cherry business started in California in 1875, but had not been very much around here yet.
Then what fruits were being raised at that time?
The prune, of course, was a predominant crop, and that was started in San Jose even before the Civil War. As time went along, our cherry orchard, first I want to say that we couldn't buy any cherry trees in Sunnyvale or San Jose at the time. We had to go to Niles, California.
How far is that?
It's about 18 miles straight east. And we bought those trees from the California Nursery Company, who until the last few years has been in business, but is now a subdivision tract as usual.
What did they charge for those cherry trees back then?
Well, those cherry trees were bought, I think the price was about 25 cents a piece, which is a lot cheaper than nowadays, of $2 and so on.
How big were they?
They were 1-year-old trees. They were just like a good-sized buggy whip.
How tall was a 1-year-old cherry tree?
Well, a 1-year-old cherry tree is really 2 years. At first, the seed of the cherry is planted in the ground. Mm-hmm. Then that's let to grow 1 year until the tree develops up. That is a wild seedling then. The following January, those trees are cut off and there's a bud inserted, whatever kind of cherry you wish to have, if you wish it. Yes. At that time, the favorite varieties were Tartarians, Roylands, and Black Republicans. There was very few Bings at that time.
Do these cherries look different, or is it mainly their taste?
Well, these different cherries are, the Royland is a canning cherry. It's pure white. And the Tartarian is a very black cherry and very sweet. It's used to pollinize the Royland and the Bing. So you have to have the Tartarians with the orchard. As these trees matured, and at the age of about 5th or 6th year, they were in production at a very moderate quantity.
In other words, your father had to wait sort of 5 years before he could really realize it.
Yes, we do the same thing today. You have to wait. There's no other way.
Well, what did he do to keep going until he could harvest his cherries?
I'm coming to that. Oh. He worked for other farmers in the neighborhood and helped them whenever anything to be done, the manual labor. Also, when he worked for these other farmers, growers of cherries especially, he learned the business more or less. In 1906, when I started to school in the Sunnyvale Grammar School, our cherry trees were approximately 6 years old. So then, from then on out, it was better, and by frugal work and taking care of things, we managed to get along. There was 4 in our family: my sister, myself, and my father and mother. And my folks had both come from the old country, Sweden, and they were very used to having a barnyard. We had several cows and chickens and raised some of our own produce. So that helped to get along. And as time went along, in 1906, the big day of that year was the San Francisco earthquake on April 18th. I can remember it very vividly, as I was trying to get out of bed when the shake started at 5:30 in the morning. The house was shaking so badly that when you tried to step on the floor hit you in the face. At that time, of course, there were no buildings in Sunnyvale that were other than wood construction, and so Sunnyvale did not suffer any damage because the wood buildings, 2 stories and less, 1 or 2 stories, were not affected by the shake. They went through all right. The big damage around here was the Agnew State Hospital. At Agnew, about 6 miles distance. As the hospital was full of patients and was built entirely of brick, the thing came down very bad. And the patients in the hospital, which was a mental hospital, got out on their own, and a lot of them were killed. I think there was 51 that got killed in the tremor. And the rest of them got out on their own, and it was several weeks before they got all rounded up again. The big damage, of course, was in the city of San Francisco, and the place we had lived at 9th and Mission Streets was entirely destroyed by earthquake and fire.
Where your folks had come from?
That's where we lived in San Francisco.
When did they come from Sweden and why to San Francisco?
Well, my father landed in San Francisco in 1875, and he stayed on and worked, and possibly in 1897 he was married.
Then your mother was born in this country?
No, my mother was born in Sweden, same as he was.
But they met over here?
They met over here. They didn't know each other.
Did they come over as children?
No, they came over. My father was born in 51, so I said he came over here in 1870 about. He didn't come direct from Sweden to San Francisco. He landed on the East Coast, and then worked at railroad work and other kind of work, and finally landed in San Francisco in 1875 when the lots on Market Street were selling for $90. He used to talk about that.
Did he ever tell you why he left his fatherland?
Well, immigration, as it always has been, is to try to better oneself, and they had heard a lot about the United States and America, and all the Europeans were one day wanted to come here, and that day immigration was easy. If you could buy yourself a ticket, that was all you needed. There was no very much about visas or transfer. You had no trouble getting into the country. And
was it the same case with your mother?
Yeah, the same case with her too.
And she left her family back there?
She left her family there, and my father, one of his brothers came over here too, who finally settled in Fresno, California on a vineyard. And my mother came over here too, and she was a good cook, so she had no trouble getting employment. She was the cook of the late Champ Clark of Senator Champ Clark of Montana, the copper magnate. And they had a winter home in San Jose on the Alameda where the Hester School is now. So we're kind of getting off the track here a little bit. I guess it's all right.
Well, if I am interested in your background, your name is Charles, and your father was also Charles?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a Swedish name or just an American version of it?
Well, that's an American version. Charles is almost in all languages. In Spanish, it's Carlos, and in Swedish, it's Carl.
Oh,
It's a Latin name originally, like most of our names are.
Well, and your father's last name was Olson.
Yes.
Was his father's last name Olson?
No, his father's name was Johnson. That's where he got his Carl John Olson, or Charles John Olson. That would be, you see, over there they take the surname. That becomes then their middle name, or even the first initial, which is lived up to even to this date in many countries in Europe.
Yes, they told us that in genealogy that if the man's name were Ole, then his son would be Olson.
Olson, yeah.
And that when the Scandinavian immigrants came to America, whatever the last name was at that point, it was frozen for all time.
Oh, yes.
And I wondered perhaps your father's name was Ole, or his father's name was Ole.
Ole and Olson is practically the same thing. He's the son of Ole. His name was Charles John. So, anyway, getting back to Sunnyvale here, we went along pretty peacefully. And like I say, I started to go to school in Sunnyvale Elementary School in 1906. And at that time, the school comprised of was 4 rooms. And it had been built, just about in 1898. The school had been built, you see. The school trustees at the time was Mr. Wilson and Mr. Rudolph Munder. Rudolph Munder was an exceptional early day Sunnyvalean who had one of the biggest saloons in San Jose, the Stockholm. And he also claimed to have the fastest driving horses in Santa Clara County.
He lived in Sunnyvale but had a saloon in San Jose?
Yes, he drove into San Jose every morning and came back every night. And he had these fast horses. They were pure black. The name, as I said, the name of the saloon was the Stockholm.
Did your father go there?
I don't know much about that. I can't tell you. Maybe they did. It was on West Santa Clara Street, opposite the Notre Dame Convent at the time. Mr. Munder was the next door neighbor of Mr. Alfonso Charret. That's Elsie Burnett now. She's in the book here. And Mr. Munder was a German and Mr. Charret was a Frenchman. And they had a great goings-on about whose horses was the fastest and how they could go. And of course, Mr. Munder was quite a bragger, and Mr. Charret was no slouch at that either. And they were neighbors, but they were not very friendly neighbors.
Were their horses all American?
Yeah,
You said that one was German, one was French, but were their horses American?
Oh yes, sure, they were American stock, which had been possibly they were good. They had good horses because both Mr. Munder and Mr. Charret were not poor people. They had means. The Charrets, of course, settled there on Pastoria Avenue, and Mr. Munder right around the corner on Evelyn Avenue. But Mr. Munder was popularly known as the Flying Dutchman. And he never had those horses going at anything but a gallop. So Mr. Munder was our school trustee and took a great interest in the school and was really doing a good job.
When you say trustee, do you mean like what we'd say today's principal? Or
No.
he was on the board of education?
He was the elected trustee. As a trustee, that we have them now, school trustees that build the schools for us. And,
I'm not familiar with the trustee system.
well, sure, you have to have each school district has its own trustees, and those trustees are responsible for building the schools, paying the teachers, taking care of all the things. Now when you go to school at De Anza, we have trustees out there too. It's in the Foothill College District, Junior College District, but we have trustees there too. Dr. Diesner here in Sunnyvale used to be on, and some people from Palo Alto and Mountain View. But anyway, we went to school, and after the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, the big point in Sunnyvale the development point was Mr. Joshua Hendy. who was a manufacturer of early day mining equipment for mines, and so ore cars and ore graders and ore separators, stamp mills. And Mr. Crossman, the real estate man, was still in business, and he saw that Mr. Hendy was given 20 acres of land to rebuild his factory in Sunnyvale, which he did.
Are there many mines around here besides New Alma Den?
No, that's the only mine. Mr. Hendy bought his good workforce down from San Francisco, and by the time he got this new factory built in Sunnyvale, which included a foundry and a machine shop and pattern shop and the whole works, he made everything. Sunnyvale had a new payroll of about 200 employees.
Did they live in Sunnyvale then?
Did they live?
Yeah, were they then inhabitants of Sunnyvale?
Yeah, the Hendys.
I had these 200 employees. That brought in 200 more people?
Yes, 200
well,
more.
What had been the population up to that point?
The population of Sunnyvale in 1906, I would say, was maybe possibly 250 people.
Now they almost doubled the town by this industry.
That's right. He did, and that was the first industry to land here. And it is now known as the Westinghouse Works Sunnyvale plant, which employs in a neighborhood of 2,500. They still do. The year following, Libby McNeil and Libby Cannery, from headquartered in Chicago, decided that they should have a West Coast fruit canning plant. And they decided that the place to have this plant was in Sunnyvale, because by this time we had a population of possibly 1,500, 1,800 people, and there was quite a bit of available people to do the work, and women to cut the fruit. Everything was done by hand. They cut the apricots by hand, and peaches and tomatoes was peeled by hand. So they built the first cannery in Sunnyvale, I think 1907, 1908. It also grew as the times grew, and the more fruit was available and more people demanded canned fruit, limits expanded. Their peak operation today has been around 2,000 people, which in one day's fruit pack requires 1,400 tons of fresh fruit to can in one day.
Did they specialize in specific fruits, or did they invent the fruit cocktail?
Libby started out, and they canned cherries, because I know that because we sold some of our first cherries crops to the Libby cannery, and they canned them up there. Then they canned apricots, peaches, pears, some plums, and tomatoes. As the cannery grew, there were other products added, such as spinach, mincemeat, and in the 20s, when the fruit salad or fruit cocktail came on the market, they were one of the first ones to acquire that branch of the canning industry. They made fruit cocktail and fruit salad, and today are one of the biggest fruit cocktail and salad canners on the coast, which is really their main object in staying in Sunnyvale, because they've got this down, and all their fruit cocktail is made in Sunnyvale.
For the whole America, Sunnyvale produces fruit cocktail.
Well, at 1,400 tons a day, you must remember that's quite a lot of fruit.
Gosh, yes.
That's about 60 carloads.
What kind of cherries did you sell them, or did your father sell them?
We sold them all varieties of cherries, and those.
You raised all varieties.
Yes, we had the Tartarians and the Republicans and the Royal Anns and some Bings. In those days, they canned all kinds of cherries. Today, their only canning cherry is the Royal Ann, the white cherry. So then as time went along, and we had a kind of a slump in Sunnyvale. It kind of stood very still through the 1910s, until 1917 when the First World War broke out, 1914 for that matter when it broke out, but about 1917 we got into the war good. And at that time the Navy took over the Hendy Ironworks plant and they built engines for ships, which many of the fighting ships of that war were made here in Sunnyvale by the Hendy. They were steam engines.
So what did you do during World War I?
By that time, in 1900, getting through the Sunnyvale Grammar School in 1913.
What grade was that when you say grammar school? Eighth
grade. Graduating from the grammar school in 1913, the following fall I entered the Mountain View High School. My sister too, she came up too.
What was the enrollment in that high school?
In the 1910s and around 1915 it was 108. That was the whole school enrollment. Wow. For freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And there was no high school in Sunnyvale at that time, of course, so we either had to go to Santa Clara or Mountain View.
The Mountain View served more than two areas?
Well, when there was no high school in your district, you could go to anyone you wanted to. You could go to Palo Alto if you wanted to. But we took to Mountain View because we had friends there that was going to school, and also it could ride our bicycles up there. It was only 3 miles.
Did most people graduating from grammar school go on to high school?
No.
Was it kind of unusual then?
Possibly 10%.
Only 10. What did they do then? They must have been pretty young when they graduated.
Well, that time ran all the way from 30. There were some of the graduates that didn't get a chance to attend school all year because they had to work. I think they work on their folks' farms or something. So the age ran from 13 years, which I was, until up to 20 years. And about, like I say, 10% went on to high school. The other 90% went to work, the ranch work or work any place. And like I say, in 1913, the Hendy Ironworks was pretty well established, and they took a lot of boys as apprentices down there to learn the various trades. The starting wage was $5 a week.
Was that a good wage?
$5 a week? Well, they done it.
Apprentice.
They done it, and then of course after 4 years of working with several raises on the way, those days a machinist served his apprenticeship and became a journeyman. He probably was paid $5 for 8 hours work, so it wasn't too extravagant. But then when the First World War come on, the wages did increase, and there was also a big demand for machinists and journeymen, foundrymen, and all that to make these. They were making these engines for the government. They had a contract.
So in 1914, when the war broke out, you were just in your second year of high school.
Well, that was really my first year. You see, I was a freshman in 13, and 14 in June I was promoted to a sophomore, of course.
So then, for most of the war, you were still in high school?
Yes, not for long. I never finished.
Oh, how many years?
I went to high school 2 full years, and starting on the 3rd, as the war got going on, there was a greater demand for food products. Agriculture expanded quite a bit, and every available acreage was put into work to produce food, so that for the soldiers, and also to export to Europe. And my father thought that, well, going to school up there was just kind of, wasn't thought of too much, we're going to school. So I was persuaded to come home, and we acquired some additional acreage.
That must have been more expensive, though.
You mean the additional acreage? Well, that's right, but instead of having 2 horses or 1 horse, or we had 4 horses or 6 horses to take care of this expanded agriculture. And as times went along, and all through the 20s, we were. But you asked me then something, I'll try to answer it.
Okay. As a boy, who were some of the characters of the town that you haven't mentioned, or if you want in more detail, that you remembered? Characters that you boys loved to watch or hear your folks tell about?
Well, the top character in those days was Rudolph Munder, the Flying Dutchman. He was our #1 prospect for. In fact, if he'd have went in the moving picture business, I think he'd have made it.
Did you boys play pranks on him, or were you kind of scared of him?
No, he was a gentleman, but he wanted to show his superiority in anything he'd done. He said his home was the finest, and his orchard surrounding his home, which was amounted to only about 7 or 8 acres, but it took good care of it. And he always wanted to beat any other neighbor in the district, and in the sense of the word, he did.
Was he married?
Oh yes, he was married, but he never had any children. And
what happened to his farm or his orchard?
It's now the site of an industrial center on West Evelyn Avenue. I think there's a garage and machine shop there, and there's a lumber yard there too. Now, we were talking about Mr. Munder, weren't we?
Yes.
Well, as the town grew, Mr. Munder also grew. In fact, he established what was called the Munder block in Sunnyvale. And on this block, he had a livery stable. He had the first hotel in Sunnyvale, which was a 2-story affair of it could have been about 30 rooms. And he also had some other buildings. And on this property, he had the first Sunnyvale waterworks. He had dug a well for his own use, which developed quite a bit of water, more than he needed. So he sold waters to many of his neighbors. He had 2 storage tanks to store the water in, and then as they needed it, they drew it out.
Selling water.
Yeah,
what did he sell it in? Were they metal or glass or plastic?
You mean the tanks?
Yes.
The tanks were California redwood.
Oh.
Wooden tanks.
What was the amount and how much did it cost?
You mean his waterworks? Oh, I think that possibly he invested some $12,000 or $15,000 at the time in a complete works, huh?
What did it cost for a person to buy water from him?
$2 a month.
And how much water did he get?
And at that time there were no meters, so Mr. Munder has been said to, if somebody used too much water and he thought that they were guilty, he used to go and get after them. But
did he die a natural death?
Yes, he died of old age, and his wife also. And today there are no remnants of anything of the Munder family.
Was she American?
No, she was also German.
What about the Frenchman now?
Well,
another big character?
Mr. Charest, well, he was the father of Mrs. Elsie Burnett, who is now the president of the Old Timers Club in Sunnyvale in her 80s.
Is that what they call it, the Old Timers Club?
The membership, you have to have been a resident of Sunnyvale before 1908.
Well, how many members do they have then?
Well, the membership is down to about 18 or 20.
And I guess they don't get very many new members each year.
They don't get any new members, but they've been fighting about trying to get the year up to about 1915 or so they could take in some more people. Because so far the membership has always voted not to take in any more people if we have enough. But our annual meetings and our yearly barbecue is getting smaller and smaller. Now, what do you want, some more questions?
Some of the other characters of the town that maybe you didn't mention before?
Well,
or any famous women?
The banker of our town who started the Bank of Sunnyvale was Mr. C.C. Spaulding, who was a native of Iowa and landed here with considerable money and started the bank with he had his brother in there and his brother-in-law and anybody else that had any amount of money they could invest and buy some shares in it. And the bank was successful. It kept on going, and it's still now the Bank of America. He was an early day character and also developed the largest orchard in the Sunnyvale area. It was called the Calkins and Spaulding Orchards. It was 250 acres.
Where?
It was on the located on the old San Francisco Highway, east of Highway 9. It was a successful orchard, and the cherry orchard on the property was 55 acres, was the best known cherry orchard in California all through the 20s and 30s, and still there's some of the orchard still intact.
Did they produce all varieties of cherries as your father?
Yes. We had 15 acres of that cherry orchard until 2 years ago, and we sold it on account of the incoming urbanization or apartment houses squeezed us out. And Mr. Spaulding, unfortunately, sold the orchard just before the boom of the Second World War. He had the first boom of the First World War, but then things went down, and in the 30s we had the Depression, everything was bad, and they sold the land in 1938 and 39. At that time, they still got a good price for it, but they did not recover everything they put into it. It was not a total success.
And if he just hung on,
if he had just hung on 2 more years, he could have doubled his money. By that time, Mr. Spaulding had passed away, you see, so it was in control of his nephew and his son and his widow, and it was kind of hard for them to carry on because it had to be financed and all this and that, so they sold it. But the people that bought the Spaulding and Calkins orchard all turned out to be quite wealthy. And now they're on the property. There's also a large shopping center.
What's it called?
Pavlina Plaza.
Oh.
So that's where that is. And
there's nothing more left of that over 200 acre?
No, there's nothing left now in private hands. It's some school sites on there, and the city of Sunnyvale has a recreation department there and their clubhouse and all that. So the Sunnyvale Recreation Center is known. They have 25 acres, I think.
Were there any famous women that you can recall as a boy or a young man in the town?
In Sunnyvale? I guess you would say that our most important woman ever to tackle anything in Sunnyvale was the city clerk, Miss Ida Cruikshank. She was mentioned the other night. She held that job. It was the only one they had from the incorporation, I believe, in 1916 until she quit in the 1960s, retired.
Wow. She was city clerk?
City clerk. She was probably the most important woman of the town.
Was she chosen or voted?
No. When they incorporated the city, yes, they did. The first city charter was put up to the voters, and there was 5 councilmen elected, the city clerk and the city treasurer, and they kept the thing going. And now it's up to, I think they have 7 councilmen and 1 city clerk, of course, who has many people working for her.
Was it unusual in those days for a woman to have such a job?
Well, you must remember when Sunnyvale started, or when the city started in 1916, the population was probably 2,500 people, and there wasn't too much to do with it. In fact, I think she worked for little or nothing the first few years. There wasn't much to pay with. Another important woman in Sunnyvale was Edwina Benner, who was the head forelady at the Libby Cannery all through the 20s and 30s and 40s, who was also a councilwoman on the Sunnyvale Council, the first councilwoman Sunnyvale ever had. And she was also the mayor of Sunnyvale for her one term. And she and her husband lived on Francis Street, and they were very quiet living people. Her husband had the local barber shop in Sunnyvale for 40 years. I don't know anybody else exactly.
Okay. When you were a boy on, say, Saturdays, what did you do for fun? I mean, fishing, or when the movies come and things like that?
Well, in the wintertime, there wasn't too much to do, but of course my own personal job was to take care of our cows and feed the chickens, and so I had work to do. And then as times went along, we acquired a bicycle, and we could go places. We rode to San Jose on our bicycles.
Why would a boy go to San Jose?
I remember going to San Jose every year. The World Series was played in the East, and as we had no telegraph office here, the San Jose Mercury News had a scoreboard and announced the game in front of the office, and we would go down there. There was possibly 1,000 people watching that scoreboard, and that was one of my objects, to get down in every October for the games that I could see.
Did the boys play baseball around here locally?
Yes, we did. We had baseball teams here locally, and also teams that Sunnyvale had a baseball team every year, donations from the local people and merchants. And we played other towns like Mountain View. It was a great rivalry. And Santa Clara had supposedly the best baseball team in the county.
What was the name? Did you call yourself the Sunnyvale somethings?
The Sunnyvale team was just known as Sunnyvale. Mountain View was Mountain View, and Santa Clara was Santa Clara.
Okay, nothing special after.
That's right. And even some baseball teams would come over from as far as Irvington. That's about 22 miles from here, which is quite a distance in the days of horse and buggy and all that.
What were the uniforms like?
The uniforms were almost non-existent. Some people had there were no team uniforms. It was you furnished your own uniform if you had one, or you could get some hand-me-downs from every year. The Pacific Coast League, which was then the foremost league on the coast, would discard some of the uniforms, and these people could buy them at so much. So it wasn't no uniform team. It was just more or less furnish your own uniform the best you could.
What about movies or the silence, radio?
The first movie in Sunnyvale was a kind of an outdoor affair. They erected a kind of a little theater on the corner of Murphy and McKinley Avenues. And they had a projector, and they had shows possibly 2 times a week or 3 times a week. And those days, they had to wait to get pictures. You couldn't just schedule a picture. Whenever you got a picture, you played it.
How much did it cost?
I think the first was children or under 18 was 10 cents, and 25 cents was the maximum.
What kind of pictures did you see?
Well, those pictures those days were mostly cowboy pictures. Of course, the start of the motion picture industry was at Niles, California, about 22 miles away from here. They had the old S&A studios.
S&H?
S&A, E-S-S-A-N-Y, S&A. And they produced such stars as Bronco Billy and Billy the Kid and all those movies, you know, that were early days, mostly cowboy pictures.
Filmed right here in California.
Right at Niles, that's where it started. There was no Hollywood that time.
Right. So then you saw silent cowboy pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember going to your first one?
Oh, I couldn't remember that thing. I can't remember any specific one.
But did you go regularly?
Well, I'd say we probably went to the movies once a month or something like that. Not that because, well, movie going at that time was something pretty new. It was something that people knew about and heard about and saw too. But then in the later, in the 20s, you know, and 30s, people went to the movies every time the show changed, they'd go to the movie and see the new one.
In those days, then it was just a fad.
That's right. And at those times, I'm talking about was all silent pictures. There was no voice. And when that came on in the, I guess, talking pictures come in the late 20s or 23 or something, didn't it? The first one I ever saw was Al Jolson. He made that famous picture called Mammy. That was the first one.
When did Sunnyvale have a regular theater that you'd go inside?
The Sunnyvale Theater was built in the 100 block of Murphy Avenue, and the original site is still the theater site in Sunnyvale.
Which theater is that?
Well, they've got the Sunnyvale Cinema, they call it. It's a different building, but it's on the same location.
Now, in your family, what kind of radio set did you have, and what shows did you like to listen to?
The radios, of course, came on in the 20s. There was very little radio before 1920. And Sunnyvale at that time had one of the first radio manufacturing companies started. In fact, they had a shop, a factory here that made radios. It was owned by the Bessie people, Arthur Bessie and his family, and it was called I think it was called the Sunnyvale Radio. And they actually made radios, one of the first ones.
Were these crystal sets? Or?
Yes, crystal sets. And then as time went along, they got different ones too. That radio is still in operation. I mean, that company, not the company itself, but it's been taken over by bigger companies, so I can't think of the name of the...
Marion?
No. But there's a television and radios are still made under the name that were made in Sunnyvale. So we had one of the first radio manufacturing places in Sunnyvale.
And what year did your father get a radio?
Oh, we didn't have any radio till possibly 1922 or something like that.
Was there programming all day long or just at night?
Well, look, the big stations had programming all around the clock, and as soon as they got started, the first when they started out, the radio programs came from San Francisco. And
the same station call letters as they are today?
Well, really, the biggest station at the time was KFI from Los Angeles. And the local station here was in San Jose, was erected by the First Baptist Church. Yeah, they to reach their people with the sermons and things. You see, the churches, and they had a radio there. Now I can't think of the letter, but it's since been disbanded. There's no more. KQW.
What shows did you like to listen to?
Well, we listened to any show that came along and just...
I mean, any ones by nationally known comedians or something that everyone in the country might have heard?
Oh, yes, we had those comedians in those days were not so many. I can't think of any right now. But Of course, Abbott and Costello and those people who came on, they were radio comedians and also television comedians later on. And Max Sennett out of Los Angeles, who had the bathing beauty scenes and all that, of course, that came on radio before the television came out, you see.
Your beauty contests?
Yeah, well, they broadcast them.
On the radio?
Yes, they did. Max Sennett and the cops and all that. Yeah, it was a great thing, though, that almost every radio had something to do with, as in moving pictures at that time, they had the cops and the robbers and the same thing, of course. It's still going on. It's not much different.
Going back to when you were in the Sunnyvale Grammar School, you said there were 4 rooms. How were the classes divided up? And how many, and who were the teachers?
Well, the 4 rooms of the Sunnyvale Grammar School, it was a 2-story affair. It was 2 rooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs. And as I said, Mr. Munder and Mr. Wilson were the trustees. And each classroom was divided into 2 separate grades. You know, the 1st and 2nd grade would be in one room, and the 3rd and 4th grade would be in the other room, and 4th and 5th, 5th and 6th, and 7th and 8th in the one room. It seemed that you started out on the bottom floor of one room, and then you went upstairs, and you went over to the other room upstairs, and you finally wound up in the 8th grade room, which was downstairs.
Oh. So does that mean you had 4 teachers?
4 teachers took care of it. And
you remember their names and anything about their personalities?
Well, one of our teachers here who taught her entire tenure was Miss Berdrow, Miss Pearl Berdrow, B-E-R-D-R-O-W. And almost everybody in Sunnyvale, the old timers, had her as a teacher in the 3rd grade. And she stayed in the 3rd grade, and that was it. And then we had Miss Disbrow in the 1st grade, who stayed for quite a number of years, but even when she started to teach in Sunnyvale, she was not a real young girl. Miss Disbrow was probably in her 30s when she started to teach. Of course, those days they had no tenure or no retirement or anything like that. They taught, and the school teacher was supposed to get along the best she could. The most famous school teacher of the time, I guess, was Miss McDaniels. She was a 6th grade teacher. And at that time, when the school was starting, they had no man teacher at all. It was all women. And finally, along about 1912, we got a principal named was Mr. Ford. And he was a pretty strict sort of a guy, and we kids that went through school, I was by that time about the 8th grade, you see. And
you were a hotshot senior.
Yeah, well, we were 8th graders. And we had been used to nothing but women teachers, and they kind of spoiled us, no doubt about it. And we sure hated Mr. Ford that we called him a lot of names.
How many were there in the school at the time he came?
When I started in 1906, there was probably 60 children, or 60. That's the Sunnyvale district, which took in the whole district of Sunnyvale.
And when you graduated, how many were there?
Oh, there was probably, in 1913, there was probably 150. You see, these children, youngsters, all came from the different ranches, and also as the town got started, and when the Hendy Ironworks got started in 1907 or so, they brought in a lot of new people.
Did they all speak English natively?
No, there were a lot of pupils who go into the Sunnyvale Grammar School that when they started in the 1st grade, they couldn't talk English.
Did they speak Spanish or?
Yeah, there were some Italian children or youngsters. There were some Portuguese, some Spanish, and myself being of Swedish descent, we talked Swedish at home. And my sister and I, we had a hard time not a hard time, but it was, you go from, you've never been any place before, and at home you talked the language, and you went to school, you had to kind of spruce up a bit.
That was shock treatment, all right.
Oh, yes.
Then everybody needed the English classes.
Yes, oh, yes. Well, those days,
Well, you don't speak with any accent.
Well, no, I shouldn't after 75 years here. I was born in San Francisco, don't forget. But English, you say English, well, there was no such a thing as English. We called it language those days. And that's what it was, more or less, to get these pupils of foreign-born parents to speak, not English, but language, to learn the language. In fact, they sent their children to school to learn the American language.
Well, what else besides language was taught at the school?
Well, we had reading, writing, and arithmetic taught to the tune of an hickory stick.
Oh, dear. No music or art or science?
Oh, no, they didn't. You probably you could take some art classes when you got to high school, but it was
just the 3 R's then?
Even in high school, it was just the basics. You understand the history, geography.
No science?
Science. Well, we had to take. I guess geometry was not science, but we took physics. Physics. You couldn't take physics until you got in your junior year.
Chemistry?
Chemistry, well, that was physics and chemistry too.
And biology?
Biology, yeah. I had biology as a sophomore at Mountain View. I had to get up the grasshoppers and stuff.
What were some of the pranks that you played, if any, as a schoolboy? Involving the school, perhaps, jokes on teachers or something.
The biggest day of playing pranks was Halloween night. They didn't trick or treat those days. They really done a lot of bad things. When I went to school, we had even no plumbing in the schoolhouse. We had outdoor plumbing, which was just the old
not plumbing.
And every homeowner had to have his outhouse, and a lot of times the boys went around and turned those over on Halloween, and
I bet you were right in there turning them over.
Well, sure, I done my share of it, then no question about that.
Not your father's, I hope.
No, well, we didn't do that, but maybe somebody else, because they went around kind of little gangs. It was just maybe 4 or 5 boys and doing these things. And
what else besides tipping over outhouses?
Well, one time I remember especially, there was a teamster in Sunnyvale who had several teams of horses and some wagons. He hauled gravel. And we actually got one of this man's gravel wagons and pulled it by hand to the railroad depot, and there was some freight cars there, flat cars, and we put this wagon on a flat car, and it landed up down in Santa Barbara someplace.
Did he ever get it back?
He got it back, all right.
Did you get in trouble for that?
Nobody ever got a hold of it. There was nothing said about it. I think the railroad company hauled it back for free. And but that was kind of a bad thing to do, you know. And they really done bad things those days, or more so than they do now, of course.
Really? Well, they didn't have shaving cream, of course. I mean, not in the spray can.
No, but they done things. They take signs around, you know, and you might wake up in the morning and find a for sale sign in front of your house which belonged 2 miles away from there or someplace.
Well, did you ever do any pranks, though, just in school?
In school?
Giving the teachers a hard time?
Oh, yeah. Those days, the teachers could get after a pupil pretty badly. That is, really with a stick or a rod or a piece of a whip or something.
They could really beat you.
They did.
On the hand or the behind? Or?
Well, oh yeah, mostly in the hind end and around. I don't think it was anybody got hurt with anything like that, but it was a kind of a
humiliating.
Yes, it's supposed to humiliate you, but I doubt if it did very much.
Did you use little slates, or was there a blackboard?
No, we had blackboards. They were not very good quality, but we had blackboards, and we had a big stove in the corner. And
would there be one in each of the rooms?
Yes, one stove in each room. And generally the people that were the most stupid, I'll put it stupid, in the class, were the ones designated to carry in the coal to feed these stoves. In the wintertime, this stove had to be heated up, and it was heated up to red heat sometimes, on the stove to warm the room. And I don't know the people who were condemned to do this work were people that didn't seem to be getting along very good, or were punished for doing something, or it's just plain, the more ignorant you were, the more coal you carried.
I see. How many buckets did you carry?
Well, I got by pretty good. It wasn't too bad.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't too bad. Now,
did girls have to carry these heavy buckets too?
These girls, no. No, the girls were had other things to do, like clean the blackboards or something like that, and they were monitors. In fact, you were given a piece of paper to write your composition on, and they passed them out, and they were supposed to be the teacher's pets.
Oh, I see.
That's a fact, though, they were.
Were there any nature studies, or was the closest biology in high school?
We never had any nature studies as such by going out to different parts of the country and taking observations. No, we never had any of that. But we did have a book on nature, and show the beginning of caterpillars and worms and what have you.
Well, now when you get into high school, can you tell me about some of your famous teachers there, or interesting experiences you had?
Well, going to Mountain View High School in the fall of 1913, and as a beginner, I rode my bicycle up to the school and put it along with the rest of the boys. The rest of the people, we had racks to put the bicycles, because everybody came with a bicycle, or some of them had horse and buggies too, but my sister and I, we had bicycles. And we walked in and sat down, and they come along and took your name down and where you were from, and your father's name and your mother's name, and registered, and that was it, and the school went on from there. Our principal at that time was a Mr. E.L. Zahn, Z-A-H-N.
German name.
German, he was German, and he taught German in the school those days. German was the principal language to be taught.
Oh.
In fact, they studied German and Latin in Mountain View High School. And he taught the German class because he was a German and he knew it very fluently.
Did you take German?
No, I got it, but we had when the Great Depression came on in the 30s, starting in 31 to 32, everything went down so cheap that people curtailed their production of foods and went back to more normal times. But we kept on going, kept through, and we had our orchards. By that time, instead of having 5 acres of orchards, we possibly had 40 acres or 50 acres.
Wow. Did you have then, or your father have the biggest cherry orchard in Sunnyvale?
Oh, these were not all cherries. By that time, we also had apricots and prunes and peaches.
Did he have the biggest orchard though?
No, they were. When I'm talking now, we were out on this side of town. See, this Sunnyvale is on that side of the El Camino, and then we were out here coming out this way. Because I forgot to tell you that in the meantime, in about 1918, we sold our place in Sunnyvale and got some bigger land. That's when we came out here. Time went along, and we'd done all our farming in those days with horses. And 1919, we had one of the first tractors in existence.
Where did you buy it?
We bought this tractor in San Jose from a J.I. Case model, which is still, J.I. Case is still a famous name in tractors, as you know. And people came from a long distance as friends of ours and neighbors and wondered how we were going to be able to pay for the gasoline and the oil and everything that this tractor would consume. But we found out and proved to the neighbors that a tractor that could do the work of, we'll say, 10 horses is cheaper to, when it doesn't work, it doesn't burn anything, you don't eat. And so we proved that our theory was right, and then we went along from that one tractor to, in the height of the production, we had as high as 3 tractors. But we finally went to Caterpillar tractors because the other one was suitable for orchards. You see, our farming in Sunnyvale was, ever since we started, was confined entirely to orchards. And the Caterpillar tractor is the most convenient best suitable to work around trees where you have to make quick turns and you have instant control. And now we were up in the 1930s in the Depression, which hit everybody, of course, in all cases. But in this part of California, and in Santa Clara Valley especially, there was very few farmers that lost everything. There was some, of course, but in the Depression, there was only one bank in Santa Clara County that went bankrupt or went out of business. That was the Bank of Los Gatos. And it was immediately bought up by another branch banking chain who took care of everything, and the depositors lost nothing and nobody lost anything. But that was the only bank that went broke here. As you know, in the East and the Middle West, there was bank after bank. They were just closed, the doors were closed, and people had the money in there, and there wasn't any.
How many banks were in Sunnyvale?
There was only one bank in Sunnyvale. The Bank of Sunnyvale, which continued its loan operation until about 1930, I guess. It was, in the meantime, sold to the Bank of America, the chain bank. And then the Bank of America established more branches in Sunnyvale. At the present time, I think they have 4 branches, or 5, I don't know which. Oh, a woodworking shop, or what do you call it?
Shop.
Shop, yeah, I took that. I thought that would come in handy. And
Did girls have home ec?
yes, they had that. And there was not much scientific stuff at that time. Now a high school is as good as a college was those days. So that's a fact.
Did you have a high school team of baseball or any sports?
Oh yes, Mountain View High School, with only 108 in attendance, was one of the best athletic schools in the county. We had the Santa Clara County Athletic League, and we competed with such teams as Palo Alto, Santa Clara, Los Gatos, Campbell, and San Jose. They were the schools at that time. And Mountain View had several outstanding athletes. And some of them landed up on the Stanford teams of football and track. And the thing that I would like to impress mostly, that I was lucky enough to go through and see the city of Sunnyvale from its very beginning almost to the present date. I think it's been a good, progressive built city, and while we've had some downs, we have more ups and downs in this city, and also the whole country in the Santa Clara Valley. And I do believe that this is the best part of the whole state of California. Well, yes, and this is Charles John Olson, age 75, telling you what he knew or what he thinks he knows or what he saw. At least most of these things that I've told you I've seen with my own eyes, so I can vouch that they're authentic. And I'd like to stay here another 75 years if I could.